Welcome to my virtual exhibit, Spray Glazing Effects on Porcelain, Altered Forms, and Surfaces. My name is Teresa Schumaker, and I've been working with clay for over 30 years. My journey with clay really began as a child growing up along the Mississippi River. I loved digging below the sand to get to the clay. Sand didn't hold its shape, but clay did. After graduating with a degree in elementary education and an art minor from the College of St. Teresa, I took a position directing art programs at Grailville, a Catholic women's center outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. I spent my free time in the art studio, shown on the left, formerly a pig barn. Initially, I worked with earthenware clay, a porous, low-fired clay, which has been used to make pottery for 25,000 years. It is often used for flower pots and bricks. This particular brick was made by my great-grandfather, Philip Bisons. Having enjoyed backpacking in Montana, I apprenticed with Peggy Steffes in the Bitterroot Valley. We worked with stoneware clay and fired in a kiln that had to be stoked with wood for at least 24 hours. This kiln, which is similar to Peggy's, has walls blackened with ash and glaze. Stoneware clay is fired to higher temperatures than earthenware, and it is non-porous. The following year, I moved to Missoula to help create the Warehouse Artists Cooperative and Gallery. There were 6 of us, including 3 potters, 2 graphic artists, and a fabric artist. We worked with stoneware clay. We built a gas kiln on the porch at the far end of the building. I met my husband, moved back to the Bitterroot Valley. Bill and I shared the studio to the left of the kiln. He did the woodworking on one half, and I did pottery on the other. I built a gas kiln and added porcelain clay to my stoneware work. Marriage, children, and extended family brought us back to Minnesota. I slowly gave up pottery for a life more in sync with our 4 children, and loved being an elementary school teacher for 25 years. About 15 years ago, Bill turned our garage into a beautiful studio where I have taught pottery to adults and children, including my own grandchildren. When I retired from teaching, I found lots of time to do my own work. About 6 years ago, I came upon an article about a potter who was achieving the atmospheric effects of a wood firing by firing porcelain clay with sprayed crystalline glazes. The crystals were developed by slow cooling in an electric kiln. I loved the colors and the flow of the glazes. I gave myself a retirement present and enrolled in a Stephen Hill workshop. Stephen explained that the spraying of layered glazes replicates air moving through a wood or gas firing. One turns the pot while spraying, lending a circular motion to the application of the glazes. Each piece is sprayed with 4 to 6 glazes. The amount and direction of spray gives an additional serendipity to each piece. One has to love the element of surprise when spray glazing. I took a second workshop and did my first experimental firing in late 2018. My husband built a spray booth out of our old dishwasher. I purchased spray equipment and mixed glazes. Many of the glazes ran off the pots and ruined the work. I was devastated. Then I started to really look at each piece. The surfaces were full of movement, depth, and color variation. I just needed to find out how to stop the running. I applied for and received a CMAQ grant in 2019. I was able to purchase enough porcelain and raw glaze materials to fire many experimental kiln loads. I knew that in order to test the flow and variation of the glaze, I needed to use 1-pound tumblers. They would be tall enough to allow the glaze to flow, yet hopefully not run off the pot. Glaze will flow along lines and shapes and define texture. I designed my tests to have a lot of texture. I applied heavy slip to each tumbler immediately after it was thrown on the wheel, creating designs on the surface. I most love a pot after it's freshly thrown. My challenge has always been to match the beauty of a freshly thrown pot, which is so alive, with the surface of a glazed pot. I was able to do about 100 tumbler tests and found about 25 combinations that showed promise. In the following slides, I'll show the test tumbler along with the close-up so that you can see the nuances of the glazes. I used two different base glazes, a white base and a tan base. These bases are referred by Stephen Hill as a cool palette and a warm palette. They are the foundation of the microcrystalline formations. Each piece was placed in a bisque or first firing. This lessens the possibility of breakage when glaze is applied, as the clay has already been hardened. After being glazed, it goes into a second firing. Spray glazing avoids dipping or pouring, so it is possible to only fire once, omitting the bisque fire and saving a lot of money. Microcrystalline formations can resemble a snowstorm or stars in a galaxy. They add a buttery feel along with the variation of color. The top third is sprayed with an ash glaze on a warm base. Ash glazes enhance the flow of glaze and encourage streaking. This is one of 4 layers in this particular kiln load. Each layer will hold 10 to 30 pieces, depending on the size of each piece. Before the firing, the glazes on the pots look dry. There is no indication of the true color that will develop through the firing. The firings, including the slow cooling time, lasted for an average of 21 hours. The slip design on these pots shows the effect of texture on the flow of the glaze. A transparent glaze, adding color and gloss, is applied after the ash glaze. On the right is an example of a warm base partnering some cooler greens and blues. On the left is the iron-rich liner I used for the warm palette. Spraying layers of overlapping glazes gives you the ability to create surfaces that softly highlight the texture. Done with the testing, I fired 3 more loads with pieces for the exhibit. Working with porcelain on the potter's wheel is a challenge. It is the softest clay to throw on the wheel, easily collapsing. But when fired, it is the hardest, non-absorbent, vitrified clay body there is. Glazes flow so beautifully on sloped surfaces, such as platters and shallow bowls. I knew that creating these forms for the project would capture the beauty of the texture, but allow me to put safer and thinner combinations on the undersides. I thought creating non-functional pieces such as birdhouses would also save me from worrying about the bottoms, as I could simply grind off any sharp edges. I created a fountain for our backyard. Until I had tested enough to trust my running glazes, I knew I didn't have to worry about the look of the underside of a fountain. Glazes can wash out, sometimes leaving subtle but interesting accents. Whether I sprayed one side more heavily, or one side of the platter was hotter than the other in the firing, this platter has an uneven finish around the rim. I always have to step back from the results of a firing. I need to let go of what I thought would happen and accept the whim of the kiln gods. It is difficult to achieve height on a thrown piece, as there's no grog in porcelain to give it body. It takes finesse. I learned that by throwing 2 individual cylinders, I could allow them to dry enough so that I could stack them and continue to throw them as one piece. This piece was also done in 2 sections. The slip work is sometimes done with the tips of my fingers as the wheel spins. It brings to mind the joy of finger painting. If I didn't like the outcome, I could blank the canvas by smoothing my hands over the pot to create another pattern. The shallow bowl on the left was refired. The first time there was not enough glaze and the colors were dull and uninteresting to me. After applying more glaze and firing a second time, the same bowl, shown on the right, was a success. Porcelain picks up pattern better than any other clay. Even the smallest details become accentuated with the glaze. Taller pieces gave me the freedom to apply the ash and transparent running glazes generously. There was a large area for those glazes to safely run. The line created by the end of the running is always interesting. This texture was rolled onto the piece when it was a cylinder. Once applied, the outside is not touched. The cylinder is then finished on the wheel, pushing only with the inside hand, and then finally finishing the top. This is another vase with a rolled texture on the outside. In this case, the original texture was an up and down striped pattern. Throwing with only the inside hand and stretching the clay causes the slanted appearance of the lines. In planning forms for this project, I discovered totems. Totems have been created as garden art by many potters. They are whimsical and encourage playfulness. This particular totem is based on my life's journey, from birth at the top to where I find myself, in mud at the bottom. Though most of my symbols are abstract, there are a few that are quite literal. The turtle is used in many cultures to symbolize creation. She represents persistence, endurance, and longevity. The loon is caring for little loons. The loon is a solitary bird. She symbolizes tranquility. In some cultures, she represents the reawakening of dreams. I have been fortunate to live many of my dreams. There are many people who have helped to make this project possible, including all the people introduced in this presentation. I especially thank Stephen Hill for sharing his expertise in his amazing workshops. I thank Lisa Truax and Ron McCorkle, who supported and advised me. The photos of Winona were generously provided by Mary Farrell. A special thanks goes out to my daughter Katie, who tirelessly edits my tangents and helps clarify my message. A very special thank you to my husband Bill, who assists patiently with his talents in woodworking, kiln maintenance, and spray booth building. I would like to thank CMAC and its collaborative private foundation for funding this project. Special thanks go to Robin Pearson and Karen Miller, who answered questions I had all through the project. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you have any questions, please email Teresa at shoemakerpottery.com. Thank you.